I have an interesting job for the day. I'm going to make a brass hoop for the head of a 12-inch snare drum. And the material I'm using is 1/4 by 5/8 brass bar. I'll roll that into a hoop and silver solder it together. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? But the devil is in the details. So I'll go through the steps I'll use to make this particular part. So I measured the outside diameter of this drum head, and it's 12.68 inches, so I need to bend a hoop that fits that outside dimension exactly. So I've laid out the length of the straight bar I need to bend, and I have extra on each side. And it turns out that I need to find the dimension of the center line of this part. So if the outside dimension is 12.68 inches, I need to subtract an 1/8 inch from that. So the developed length of this part is 39.05 inches. And I have a lot of extra material on both ends, which we'll need to make a good bend. So my favorite way of bending is to bend around a form of a known diameter. So I've already made one of these drum heads, and I started with a larger disc to bend the band around, and of course it came out oversized. So I kept reducing the size of this disc of MDF until the part that comes off it is exactly the right size. So the next step is I have to have a way to hold this bar against the disc of MDF really securely, and I need to be able to release it quite easily. So the way I've done that is to make some special fixtures that go on a vise. I'm using a milling machine vise, but you could use any vise with a movable jaw and a replaceable jaw face. So I've just made a little holder that goes on the jaw farthest from me. I'll get this screwed into place. This is just a flat piece of 1/4 inch thick steel. I'll get that snugged up. And the part that goes on the moving jaw has a shaft on it that's a nice snug fit inside this MDF disc I've made. So I'll get this attached to the movable jaw. I'll put a spacer in here to hold the leading edge of this MDF disc. Okay. Now I can't make a bend that goes all the way to the end of this part. It has to start inboard a little bit. So I'll line up the end of my bar with the end of my clamping block, and I'll tighten this in the fixture. So that's held very snugly now. So all I need to do is to start bending this around the form. And to do that, I've put a ball bearing on a steel bar. I'll just fasten this into place with a bolt, and then I can just bend this around that form. It'll take on the curvature very accurately. It's about as far as I'll go for the first bend. And now I can release this, slide this around to get another bite. I'll release it again. I'll move this around to get one more bite on it. So that's about as far as I can go from this side. So let me release this. And I'll complete the bend from the other side. So I'll start the bend a little bit past the end line. Get this clamped into place. And we'll continue the bending. Now you can see what's going to happen here. This end will collide at some point with the other end. So to continue the bend, I need to lift this up. And again, I have to lift this to complete the bend, and my part may get a little bit out of kilter, but I can fix that afterwards. So all I need to do is complete that bend and make sure every part of it has come up tight against the form. Now we'll release this. So it's very, very slightly overbent. I can tell that my marks for trimming are not quite lining up, so I need to open this up a tiny, tiny bit. And I need to straighten it a little bit so it lays flat. And we are just about there. I'll have to do a little correction of this bend, but you can see that we're very close to matching the shape of the drum head. I trimmed the excess material from both ends and did a little tweaking to make it a perfect circle, and we can test the fit against the drum head now. I think you can see it's an excellent fit. So the next step is to silver solder this joint together. I need to flatten the ends of this hoop before I silver solder them together. I'm going to use a milling machine for this. If you don't have a milling machine, you could do the same job with a file. So I'm going to take a very light cut on these and move right up to the scribed line. Move in another 20 thousandths. And I'm right on that scribed line. So I'll flip this part over and machine the other side. Before I silver solder this joint, I need to fixture it so the ends meet perfectly. So to do that, I've clamped the ring to a perfectly flat plate. And the first step is I'm going to put flux on everything. This is special flux for silver soldering. So I need to get a nice liberal application of that on all the parts where I want the solder to flow. And I clean these parts with acetone to get all the grease off them. So that should be plenty of flux. And to get the alignment up and down, I'll put a small clamp on both parts. That will draw them into perfect alignment that way. And then to get the alignment in this direction, I'll clamp the ring to a perfectly flat plate. And now I can remove this clamp. And I have excellent alignment on this joint, and there's a little bit of pressure holding the joint tight. I've cut a small piece of silver solder that I'll rest right on top of the joint. So once I get this brass up to temperature, capillary attraction will draw that solder down into the joint. So I'll use an oxyacetylene torch to slowly heat that joint until first I see the flux change and then see the solder soften and flow into the joint. I'll heat the joint from the bottom side. I don't want to put the heat directly on the solder because it's so small it could easily melt before the brass is up to temperature. So the flux is heating up. I want to go slow and easy here. So the flux is just about getting to the right temperature now. And we should see that solder melt any moment. There it goes. It's melting. It's flowing into the joint. And just to be sure, I'm going to add a little more silver solder to that joint, just to make sure the edges get coated with solder. I want to make sure that solder goes all the way through. So there's our silver solder joint. Now I'll clean up the extra silver solder on these joints. So that's cleaned up very nicely. Now I'll use a router to put a full radius on the top edge of the ring. A lot of people are surprised to learn that a router can cut brass, but it actually does a nice job. It's important to use a carbide-tipped router bit and one that has a ball bearing on it. And also it's important to feed into the cutting action. If you lose your orientation, the bit can grab the part and spin it up pretty fast. So always feed into the cutter. So I'll just start cutting on this edge and I'll show you the results. It's coming out beautifully. So I've gone all the way around the outside of this ring, and you can see what a beautiful radius it's made. Now we'll do the same thing on the inner edge. So the cutting is finished, and you can see I got a beautiful radius on that edge. I showed these rings to the person I'm doing the job for, and he loved this rounded edge detail so much that he asked me to put it on the inside bottom edge as well. I'll use 320 grit abrasive on a random orbit sander to put the final finish on this part. I'm going over all the surfaces with a Scotch-Brite pad, just to brighten things up and make the finish a little bit more lustrous. Let's try this into place. As you can see, it's an excellent fit against the drum head, so this job is completed. Even though it seemed like a simple job in the beginning, there were a few challenges along the way, but I'm delighted with how it came out. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to my patrons who make all this possible. I'll see you in the next video. I love making these videos, and I'm honored that you're watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified about new videos. I read every comment, and I do my best to answer all questions. If you like what I'm doing, please click the Patreon link and become one of the great people who help me create new videos.